This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are the things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
The other night, I found myself having a pretty funny conversation with my wife. I was spitballing ideas for the podcast, and I found myself musing about the blink and you missed it rise and fall of the young lady we all know as the Hawk Tuah girl. Now, the funny part was that my wife legitimately had missed it. The viral moment of Tennessee native Haley Welch had come and gone without really making a blip on my wife's pop culture radar. And honestly, why should it have? We're talking about a busy mother of two working full-time at a Canadian NGO. In 2024, she had bigger concerns than the antics of a mildly provocative Southern 20-something. So I was halfway through a rant about the fortunes of this viral celebrity turned crypto hustler when my wife stopped me and said, "Wait, can you just start from the beginning? What was the whole Hawk Tuah thing anyway?" Now, my wife well knows the danger of asking me about the backstory of absolutely anything. So she must have been legitimately curious. For now, I had an excuse to recount the ballad of young Miss Haley Welch. In June of 2024, the 21-year-old bed spring factory worker rocketed to internet notoriety after she and a friend noticed a couple of YouTubers doing man-on-the-street style interviews with young clubgoers on a night out in Nashville, Tennessee. As many of you know, this style of content has become ubiquitous, especially in the age of one-minute reels and TikToks. Interviewers with tiny microphones ask spicy questions and hope for answers that are funny, provocative, or just weird enough to attract views. In this case, the YouTubers were Tim and D from Tim and D TV, a fairly unremarkable channel that was about to be blessed with easily the most viral moment of 2024. Haley and her friend approached the YouTubers, some questions were asked, and internet history was made.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
You gotta give him that Hawk Tuah and spit on that thing, you get me?
I don't get you. I think you gotta demonstrate.
Hawk Tuah and spit on it! Spit on it!
There it is. Hawk Tuah, the exaggerated loogie that launched 1,000 ships. Tim and Dee had their first truly viral video on their hands. Within a few days of launching, the original video had received millions of views on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. But that was just the start. The video inspired countless remixes, parodies, and reaction vids, not to mention hundreds of unauthorized repostings of the original Tim and Dee video, with the watermark scrubbed out. You know you've got a hit when other channels start unscrupulously drafting off your views. Within a week, Hawk Tuah had broken the invisible internet sound barrier that divides popular videos from bona fide memes. Now, by 2024, the story of flash-in-the-pan internet viral fame was a tale as old as time. I mean, if you're as old as I am, you may have fond memories of Chocolate Rain, Sweet Brown with her cold pop, or the Double Rainbow Guy. Remember him? But What made Haley Welch a little different from her catchphrase-inspiring predecessors was her rare ability to transform her viral moment into a potential career in entertainment. After an initial period of shock and embarrassment, Welch decided to embrace the attention and profit off it as best she could. Barely 2 weeks after the original video exploded, there were already folks slinging Hawk Tuah branded merchandise online. So, as Haley put it, quote, "If everyone else is making money off it, I might as well too," end quote. It helped that Haley Welch was a genuinely charming and entertaining person who did well on the many podcasts and YouTube shows who soon came looking for interviews with the internet's latest fascination. Haley could hold her own with the likes of Bill Maher, K-Rock DJs, and internet provocateurs like Jake and Logan Paul. Her raunchy catchphrase aside, Haley Welch had a certain down-to-earth Southern charm and a seemingly effortless sense of humor. To the surprise of many, Haley Welch was ready for her moment. By July of 2024, barely a month after becoming a meme, Welch had quit her job at the Mattress Spring factory, had signed with a well-known show business management firm, and was making huge sums selling her own Hawk Tuah-inspired merchandise. She was soon taking the stage with country stars like Zach Bryan and was making guest appearances alongside Shaquille O'Neal during his DJ sets. By September of 2024, a series of well-received podcast appearances segued into the launch of her own Jake Paul-produced interview show, the punningly titled Talk Tuah with Haley Welch, because in the 2020s, all human beings must have a podcast. But to be fair, Talk Tuah found an impressively large audience. This was partially thanks to high-profile guests like Mark Cuban, rapper Wiz Khalifa, and comedian Whitney Cummings. But we shouldn't discount the public's continued fascination with this Tennessee every girl turned unlikely star. And if our friend Haley Welch had simply stuck to being an internet personality, an entertainer, and a podcast host, I have no doubt that she likely would have seen many years of success. And I probably would not have found myself giving a long-winded history of her rise to my wife. But Haley was not content to stay in that lane. After becoming the face of a poorly reviewed AI-powered dating advice app called Pookie Tools, Haley Welch made her bold entry into the world of cryptocurrency. After partnering with a company known as Over Here, Haley Welch launched her very own meme coin. Called Hawk, that's Hawk with a $sign at the front, or more colloquially, Hawk Tuah coin, the new cryptocurrency was sold by Over Here as, quote, not just another token launch. Haley's launch of Hawk meme coin represents a meaningful step in bridging mainstream audiences with the crypto world, end quote. The Hawk Tuah girl now had her own cryptocurrency, and her fans were getting the exciting opportunity to get in on the ground floor. When the coin was officially made available for sale, its value spiked and hit a market cap of nearly $500 million. It seemed like Hawk Tuah's fans had come out strong for this new crypto product. But just 20 minutes after the peak, Hawk Tuah coin fell to $60 million. By the time markets closed, the cryptocurrency had lost over 90% of its value. Fans who had been convinced to buy the coin quickly headed to social media to register their discontent. Some told tales of losing their life savings and their children's college funds after having invested in Hawk Tuah. The Hawk Tuah coin debacle had all the trappings of a classic pump and dump scheme. sometimes called a rug pull. This is an old market manipulation scam that has been around as long as we have had stock markets. The scammer buys up a huge amount of cheap stock, or in this case, cryptocurrency, and then goes out and actively starts promoting it by exaggerating the potential for big returns. This is called the pump. If enough people buy the stock, or in this case, the coin, then the price goes up. Once the price has been inflated, the scammers then sell off their original cheaply acquired shares, making a tidy profit. This is called the dump. The sell-off ends up tanking the stock, and all the people who are convinced to buy the inflated product are left holding the bag. From the outside, Haktua coin looked like one of the biggest one-day pump and dumps in recent memory. Now, I should be clear that as of this recording, the allegations of wrongdoing have yet to be proven in court. But it's worth knowing that Haley Welch and the creator of her meme coin are being sued in a multi-million-dollar class action suit brought forward by those who claim that they were defrauded. If this was indeed a scam, then it's worth asking whether or not the Haktua girl knew exactly what she was getting into. Welch has since claimed that she had no real understanding of cryptocurrency when she got involved in the project. She's also said in interviews that she was taken advantage of by the unscrupulous coin developers that she foolishly partnered with. It may have been that Haley Welch was the unwitting poster girl for a crypto scam that she did not understand. She may have even been misled or purposely kept in the dark by the coin's creators. There is a version of events where Haley Welch was a victim of the scammers. Then, of course, there's also the possibility that Haley Welch had been privy to a plan to pull the rug out on Haktua coin, but she honestly did not know that such a thing constituted a fraud. Now, ignorance to the law is not a defense that holds up in court. But if that was the case, it might help Haley elicit some sympathy from a public that seems to have fully turned on her. Hopefully, the truth of the matter will eventually be revealed in court. But I can understand how someone unfamiliar with cryptocurrency might have a hard time telling a legal crypto gambit from a shady scam. Meme coins are risky, speculative products whose value is entirely derived from whatever hype can be generated by the associated meme, a social media community, or a celebrity endorsement. And forgive me if I have misunderstood this, but it seems like the pump part of the pump and dump scheme has now become business as usual in the meme coin marketplace. A meme coin's value comes from the excitement around the product, or the pump. As of this recording, the rules on exactly how one can legally promote a meme coin are still being considered by legislators around the world. The laws on this seem to vary from country to country. In this way, a legal meme coin project is hard to differentiate from its scammy cousin. What's clear is that in 2024, Haley Welch showed a determination to turn her 15 minutes of viral fame into as much money as she possibly could. She proved to be quite effective at this. In fact, she may have been the best we've ever seen to emerge from the world of internet memes. But with her crypto play, she clearly flew a little too close to the sun. Since Miss Welch's crypto flameout, there have been no shortage of think pieces analyzing her rise and fall. So much of her story seems to reflect something about our current moment. The viral fame, the podcast alley-oop, dabbling with AI, and then finally crypto. In his very thoughtful piece for Defector, staff writer Patrick Redford also connected her saga to what he called the, quote, relatively modern phenomenon of the wide acceptance and praise of bag-chasing nihilism, end quote. For those unfamiliar with the slang, chasing the bag is just relentlessly pursuing money. The Redford piece points out that we are currently living through an era where that relentless pursuit has become particularly crass and void of ethical concerns. Anyone who can grab the bag will be celebrated, no matter how they did it. If I was to disagree with Redford, it would only be on the quibbling point that the wide acceptance of bag-chasing and nihilism is a quote-unquote relatively modern phenomenon. No, sir. My study of history has shown me that chasing the bag is a very old pursuit indeed. This is not the first era when ethical concerns have become secondary to the goal of getting rich. Take, for example, this quote from the 1920s. When considering the ethical implications of a particular get-rich-quick scheme, one famous financial huckster reflected that, quote, environment had made me rather callous on the subject of ethics. Then, as now, no one gave a rap for ethics. The almighty dollar was the only goal, and the possession of it placed a person beyond criticism for any breach of ethics incidental to the acquisition of it. End quote. In the eyes of that particular hustler, the ethics of getting rich in the 1920s were remarkably similar to those in the 2020s. If you managed to grab the bag, then automatically you were beyond criticism. But I think it's worth knowing who gave us that quote. That trenchant insight into the ethics of getting rich comes to us from none other than Charles Ponzi, a man so famous for his elaborate financial fraud that an entire genre of scam now bears his name, the Ponzi scheme. You see, this is why I got ranting about the Hawk-Tuah girl to my wife in the first place. So much about Haley Welch's story reminded me of Charles Ponzi. Ponzi was an Italian immigrant who arrived in the United States flat broke, but remained deeply focused on the most American of American dreams, getting rich. Eventually, he was seduced by that other American dream, becoming famous. In pursuit of wealth, Ponzi devised a financial fraud that was in some ways deeply convoluted, but in others was dead simple. An elaborate plan to make money by using postage stamp coupons eventually devolved into a classic robbing Peter to pay Paul scheme. On the face of it, Ponzi comes off as a textbook charlatan and lifelong crook. But a closer look at his story raises questions about his true motives. Ponzi would later claim that he never intended to defraud anyone of their money. His shady practices were simply a stopgap measure meant to help him bide his time before he could transform his business into something legitimate. After all, the legitimate world of high finance can sometimes be hard to distinguish from a con man's shell game. In his autobiography, Ponzi proudly quoted the Washington Evening Star, which had once said of him, quote, whether he retires a millionaire or is finally detected a swindler, Ponzi must stand as a remarkable figure. And, quote, it must be said of him that whatever his game, he has certainly played it well, end quote. Ponzi knew that if you grabbed the bag, even by shady means, at least a few newspapers would say, well, you gotta hand it to the guy. But should we trust the spin coming from noted scammer Charles Ponzi? How exactly did his namesake financial fraud function? How did he get away with it? And why was he eventually caught? By examining Ponzi, can we gain a deeper understanding of Haley Welch and all the other hustlers we live amongst today? Let's see what we can find out today on Our Fake History. Episode number 242, What Was Ponzi's Scheme? Part 1. Hello and welcome to Our Fake History. My name is Sebastian Major, and this is the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story that it simply must be told. Before we get going this week, I have an announcement about our upcoming trip to Greece in September of 2026. We only have a handful of spots left before the trip is sold out. It seems like a bunch of folks ended up booking over the holiday, which totally rules. I can't wait to see you in Greece. But what that means is that spots are now limited. So if you're interested in coming with me and a bunch of other OFH fans to Greece, then you should get yourself booked as soon as possible. The good folks at John Shores Travel are looking to have all the trip's bookings confirmed by early February. This is so all the accommodations and the transport can be booked in time for our trip in September. We are aiming to have everything locked in by February 10th, 2026. So, if you've been thinking about joining us on this trip, now is the time to book. It would be a shame if you missed out. So, to book, you can either click on the link I will have in the show notes, or you can go to ourfakehistory.com and follow the links for the trip, or you can head directly to johnshorestravel.com and look for the trip to Greece in 2026. It's going to be a blast. And for those of you that are already signed up, I can't wait to meet you and hang out on the Acropolis. Oh man, it's going to rule. This week, we are turning our attention to the life and crimes of Charles Ponzi. As longtime listeners know, occasionally this podcast takes a break from exploring fake history and instead focuses on history's greatest fakes. The man born Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi certainly qualifies. In 1920, Ponzi's Boston-based Securities Exchange Company went on a remarkable 7-month run where he enticed over 30,000 investors to place their money in his care on the promise that he would deliver an unheard of 50% return in the space of only 90 days. In January of 1920, Ponzi was an obscure Italian immigrant with a curious idea about getting rich by way of postal coupons. By July, he was one of the most famous men in Boston. By September, the entire thing had unraveled, and Ponzi had lost an estimated $20 million of his victims' money. That works out to approximately $320 million in today's U.S. currency. Despite Ponzi's assertions that he had discovered an ingenious and legal way to game international exchange rates to quickly enrich his investors, the Securities Exchange Company proved to be a massive scam. Ponzi was not, in fact, a brilliant financial wizard who had discovered a new way to create massive returns. The Securities Exchange Company did not actually do anything to turn $1 into $1.50. The whole thing had been an illusion that by its very design was destined to flame out. Now, if there's a historical myth to be busted here, it's the idea that Charles Ponzi invented what we think of as the quote-unquote Ponzi scheme. We now colloquially use the term Ponzi scheme to refer to a huge variety of pyramid scams, where money provided by new marks is used to pay out the scam's earlier marks. But this style of financial fraud long predates the 1920s. By the time Ponzi started making waves in Boston, people had long been aware of a fraud known as robbing Peter to pay Paul. That idiom dates back centuries, and by the late 1800s, it was regularly used to describe Ponzi-style scams. In fact, in 1920, Ponzi was not even the first person in Boston to have run a well-publicized Peter to Paul scam. In 1878, a former fortune teller and stage psychic named Sarah Howe opened something called the Ladies' Deposit Company, which presented itself as a Quaker charity-endorsed investment opportunity for widows and single women in Boston. Howe's company promised an impressive 8% return on investment every month, but she never once did any actual investing to make that happen. Instead, early investors were simply paid with the principal provided by new marks. When the mechanics of this were revealed in the pages of the Boston Daily Advertiser in 1880, spooked investors demanded their money back in droves. Before the year was out, Sarah Howe was bankrupt and had been arraigned as a fraudster. Now, even though Sarah Howe predated Ponzi by a solid 4 decades, we don't call this scam something like, the Sarah Howe hustle. Even the classic robbing Peter to pay Paul moniker is now considerably less common than the far more recognizable Ponzi scheme. In this way, Ponzi has become the Kleenex or the Vaseline of the Peter to Paul scam. When Bernie Madoff lost his investors close to $20 billion after being caught at his own elaborate Peter to Paul in 2008, still, the name did not change. At this point, we could very likely call it the Madoff maneuver, but still, the Ponzi scheme has stuck. Now, the reason for this, I think, has something to do with Charles Ponzi himself. You see, what makes the Ponzi scheme interesting is not the very basic Peter to Paul maneuver that's at its heart. It's everything that surrounds it. It's the arcane postal scheme that Ponzi pretended was the source of his astronomical returns. Even his quote-unquote legitimate front existed in a legal and moral gray area. Oddly, this helped his scam. There was also something about Ponzi's personal style, his fashion sense, his affable nature, and his genuine love of the limelight. Biographer Mitchell Zukoff, whose 2005 book on Ponzi has been an essential source, has pointed out that most financial scams operate using what he calls, quote, a 3-step playbook: splash, cash, and dash. That is, make a big impression, grab as much money as possible, and disappear before being exposed, end quote. What makes Ponzi fascinating is that he was a master of the first 2 steps. He knew how to make a splash, and he knew how to grab the cash. But then he just couldn't bring himself to make the dash. The question is why? Well, one of the ways to answer that question is to investigate the writing of Charles Ponzi himself. In 1937, Ponzi independently published a memoir, modestly titled The Rise of Mr. Ponzi, the autobiography of a financial genius. The book was barely noticed when it first came out, but it's since become the subject of fascination for historians interested in Ponzi and his financial shenanigans. The book offers an incredibly valuable perspective on Ponzi's life, and in many cases, it's the only source we have for certain chapters of his journey. But obviously, it was written by a famously unreliable narrator who was doing his utmost to salvage his tarnished reputation. As the subtitle suggests, it's also infused with that characteristic Ponzi swagger. The thesis is essentially, you may have heard that I am a crook, but actually, I'm a misunderstood genius. So, what should we believe about Mr. Ponzi? In a world of financial scams, what made his scheme so irresistible to the people of Boston in the 1920s? Was Ponzi little more than a sophisticated sneak thief, or has this entrepreneurial immigrant been misunderstood? Well, let's dive into it. Today's episode of Our Fake History is being brought to you by Rosetta Stone. Are any of you out there planning to travel this year? I know at least a few of you are. Well, imagine going into that trip actually understanding the language. Rosetta Stone helps you feel more confident, more connected, and way less like a tourist. Rosetta Stone has been the trusted leader in language learning for over 30 years. Their immersive, intuitive method helps you truly pick up your new language naturally. No memorizing random vocabulary lists, no feeling lost. Now, as you've probably heard, I'm going to Greece this year with a bunch of listeners. And before I go, I'm going to try and learn some Greek with Rosetta Stone. I'm also pumped to use their true accent feature to really get my pronunciations locked down. Don't wait. Unlock your language learning potential now. Our Fake History listeners can grab Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Yeah, that's a lifetime membership. It's incredible. That's unlimited access to 25 language courses for life. Visit rosettastone.com/history to get started and claim your 50% off today. Go to rosettastone.com/history and start learning today. Today's episode of Our Fake History is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Carlo Ponzi stepped off a steamer in Boston Harbor for the very first time in November of 1903. The young man was 21 years old, and like so many other Italians of the era, he had come to the United States to seek his fortune. But Ponzi would later admit that right from the start of his existence in America, he was a bit of a contradiction. He would write of his arrival, quote, "Truly, for an immigrant, I did not look the part. There was nothing in my appearance to suggest the breadwinner. Nothing that could even be remotely associated with the thought of manual labor, of work of any kind, of economic penury. From tie to spats, I looked like $1 million just out of the mint, like a young gentleman of leisure, perhaps like the scion of wealthy parents on a pleasure tour. And that goes to show that appearances don't mean a thing. In fact, I was in a jam right then and there, in an economic ham and a critical predicament at that, and 5,000 miles away from home and 500 more miles away from my ultimate destination, in a strange country with no friends and no money. That's it. Broke right from the start. My entire resources in cash amounting to $2.50. End quote. It is rather poetic that the very moment Ponzi arrived in America, his appearance in no way matched his financial reality. But perhaps Ponzi overstated things when he mused that appearances don't mean a thing. Ponzi would eventually make a fortune based on his ability to keep up appearances. But despite the fact that Ponzi arrived in Boston with only $2.50 in his pocket, he did not begin his life poor. He was born in Lugo, Italy in 1882 to a respectable middle-class family. His father, Oreste, came from a long line of hoteliers and worked as a postman. His mother, Imelda, came from more aristocratic stock and proudly bore the honorific Donna Imelda. The family moved from Lugo to Rome and then eventually Parma, and did well enough that they were able to send their only child, young Carlo, to a private Italian boarding school. Sadly, Ponzi's father would pass away while young Carlo was away at school, but he left his son a modest inheritance that, if managed wisely, would pay for the young man's university education. Sure enough, the academically capable Ponzi was eventually accepted to study at the University of Rome. But like so many undergrads before and after, Ponzi let the party get the best of him during his college days. He fell in with a crowd of students from wealthier families, for whom university was little more than a 4-year, academically flavored Roman vacation. His pals were flashy dressers who liked to dine out, drink expensive wine, and gamble. Ponzi was keen to keep up. The only difference was that he was not bankrolled by the same enormous wealth. He ended up burning through his college fund long before he was even close to earning a degree. By 1903, Ponzi had washed out of school. He was broke, but with a taste for the good life. Embarrassed, but not at all ready to take a mundane job, Ponzi instead took the advice of one of his uncles, who encouraged him to seek his fortune in the USA. He would later recall that various family members told him that if he headed to America, he would no doubt become rich, quote, just like that, just as if amassing a fortune in America was something which could not be helped. You can't miss it, they had insisted, to overcome my hesitancy. In the United States, the streets are actually strewn with gold. All you have to do is stoop down and pick it up. End quote. That was all young Ponzi needed to hear, so he made plans to leave Italy. He booked comfortable second-class accommodations on the SS Vancouver, the steamer that would bear him from Rome to Boston. But Ponzi quickly lost the $200 cash he had to get himself settled stateside. A few bad hands of cards quickly parted the young man with his money somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. Perhaps anticipating that young Carlo could not be trusted to arrive in America with any money left in his pockets, his mother and uncles had wisely provided him with a prepaid train ticket from Boston to Pittsburgh, where he would stay with a distant cousin while he got himself on his feet. For the first 4 years after arriving in America, Ponzi lived a humble existence, scraping by on wages earned at entry-level jobs, ranging from grocery clerk to sewing machine repairman to insurance salesman. In that time, he learned English and started going by the anglicized version of his name, Charles, or Charlie to his friends. He also dabbled with using the last name Bianchi, which is Italian for white. Prejudices being what they were at the time, he hoped that this might help him underscore the fact that he was Northern Italian. But in 1907, after making little headway in America, he did what many others in his place have done. He gave Canada a try. He moved to Montreal, which at the time was seeing its own massive influx of Italian immigration. And it was here, in Canada, where Ponzi got his first taste of financial scammery. Ponzi, using his preferred alias Charles Bianchi, quickly found work at an institution known as Banco Zarossi, a newly founded bank that catered to Montreal's growing Italian community. Ponzi's ability to speak Italian, English, and serviceable French more than qualified him for an entry position at the bank. But very quickly, Ponzi proved that he was a talented salesman who had a knack for bringing in new customers to the bank's trademark investment scheme. The owner of the bank was an Italian-Canadian named Luigi Zarossi. Zarossi was a former cigar dealer who opened his bank with the promise that he would be able to get his depositors considerably better returns than the other banks that catered to Italians. Most of Zarossi's competitors offered their depositors a modest 2% interest. This was done by investing in reliable Italian securities that paid 3%. The banks took 1% and passed the other 2% on to the customers. Eager to get an edge on competitors, Zarossi started offering his customers an unheard of 6% interest rate. Now, how was this possible? Well, the way Zarossi explained this was interesting, because clearly his young protege, Charlie Bianchi, aka Ponzi, was taking notes. Ponzi biographer Mitchell Zukoff explains that, quote, Zarossi tapped into the public's widespread suspicion that greedy bankers paid pennies on the dollar while keeping huge profits for themselves. His largesse was possible, he claimed, because he would share his bank's earnings more fairly with his depositors. End quote. Zarossi was presenting himself as one of the only honest dealers in town, a man of the people. But as it turned out, these massive interest rates truly were impossible. To make the promised interest payments, Zarossi essentially started robbing Peter to pay Paul. Specifically, he started paying the promised interest by stealing money that his depositors were sending to their families back in Italy. Zarossi knew that given the speed of the mail in 1907, it would be months before word would come from Italy that the promised money had not arrived. Then he would blame the mail or the banks on the Italian side for the mix-up. If a customer demanded a refund, then the bank would use money taken from some other depositor to make that person whole. The mailed to Italy element of the scheme succeeded in buying Zarossi time before he was found out, but like all scams of this sort, it was destined to implode. Now, while all of this was going on, Charlie Ponzi, or Mr. Bianchi as he was known, was rising within the ranks. Within a year, Ponzi had become the manager of Montreal's Banco Zarossi. But he had little time to enjoy the promotion. By mid-1908, Zarossi had made his splash, had grabbed some cash, and now he was ready to make his dash. One day, knowing that the walls were closing in, the bank owner shoved as much money as he could into his luggage and made a getaway to Mexico City. Now, interestingly, in Ponzi's autobiography, he soft pedals this entire scam, and even tries his best to rehabilitate the image of Luigi Zorossi. He writes, quote, "While it's true that later events gave Zorossi a sort of black eye, it's my opinion, my expert opinion of him, that he was the victim of circumstance and bad associations rather than a man of evil intent and dishonest inclinations." End quote. Now, I noted that because this is also how Ponzi speaks of himself throughout his autobiography. As financial fraud expert Dan Davies has observed, Ponzi's book offers, quote, "a unique insight into the psychology of a man who always has a reason why nothing was his fault." End quote. But I also think that Ponzi's charitable assessment of Zorossi demonstrates something unique in his character. A different kind of crook would throw Zorossi under the bus, but not Ponzi. And I know this might sound hard to believe given Ponzi's later crimes, but the man had a real generous streak. Some might even call it benevolence. A great example of this came in the aftermath of Zorossi's disappearance. When word got out that the bank owner had flown the coop, panicked depositors demanded their money back in droves, which inevitably collapsed Banco Zorossi. With Zorossi in the wind, Montreal's police started investigating the bank's remaining employees to see if anyone else had been involved in the fraud. And sure enough, one employee went underground after evidence turned up that he had stolen around $900 from a client. Another individual who had worked at the bank tragically chose to take his own life after he learned that he was being investigated by the Montreal police. As the bank manager, Ponzi also found himself to be a person of interest. But instead of immediately skipping town, he chose to stay in Montreal. In his haste to make a dash to Mexico, Zorossi had abandoned his wife and 4 daughters. They were in dire straits, and remarkably, Ponzi stepped up to help them during this difficult period. Had he been more calculating, he would have left Montreal and Canada as fast as he possibly could. He seems to have been genuinely concerned for the well-being of Zorossi's family. Now, it's still unclear whether or not Charles Ponzi was privy to Zorossi's bank scheme, or if he was profiting off it in any way. But what he did next makes him seem pretty suspicious. By August of 1908, Ponzi was totally out of money and was no longer able to help Zorossi's family in any material way. He was also paranoid that he might be arrested at any minute. So he finally decided to leave town. The only problem was that he was flat broke. So Ponzi decided to pull his first real fraud, or the first fraud we can definitively pin on him. On August 29th, 1908, Ponzi walked into the Montreal office of the Canadian Warehousing Company. Canadian Warehousing had at one time been a client of Banco Zorossi, to whom Ponzi paid regular visits to collect receipts and the like. Given that he was a familiar face, no one found it suspicious when Ponzi nonchalantly walked in and headed to the empty office of the manager, Damien Fournier. He quickly located one of Fournier's company checkbooks, neatly tore a blank check from the back, and then left unnoticed. Ponzi then forged Monsieur Fournier's signature and made the check out for the legit-sounding amount of $428.58. He then hurried to the bank and had the check cashed in American dollars. So far, so good. But instead of hopping on the very next train available, Ponzi decided that he was going to use his new ill-gotten windfall to do a little shopping. He hit Montreal's fashion district and outfitted himself with a new overcoat, new boots, a couple new suits, a handful of shirts, collars, spats, and suspenders. Because what's the fun of being on the run from the law if you aren't looking good? For the first time, the glittering trappings of wealth kept Ponzi from successfully making the dash. Keep that in mind, friends, because that is a pattern that will repeat. While he lingered in Montreal, the bank figured out that the signature on the check was a forgery. A Montreal police detective was sent to Ponzi's boarding house, where, sure enough, he found the 26-year-old Italian. Apparently, as soon as the police officer identified himself as a detective, Ponzi immediately confessed, saying simply, "I'm guilty." A quick search discovered that Ponzi had kept the receipt of his forged check and still had around $200 in cash left over after his shopping spree. Given the evidence, Ponzi's trial was an open and shut case. He was sentenced to 3 years hard time in Quebec's notoriously grim St. Vincent de Paul Penitentiary. But the irrepressible Ponzi quickly distinguished himself as a model prisoner. He was charming, funny, good with the guards, and clearly intelligent. After a stint doing hard labor crushing gravel, Ponzi was put to work as a clerk in the prison blacksmith's workshop. He was talented enough that he was soon promoted and eventually found himself working as the clerk for the prison warden. The warden took a liking to Ponzi and eventually recommended him for early parole. He was released in July of 1910 after having only served about half of his original sentence. But Ponzi had only been free for 17 days before he once again found himself in hot water. Before leaving Montreal for good, Ponzi met up with one of his old co-workers from Banco Zarossi, specifically the fellow who was still being hunted by Montreal authorities for having pocketed $900 from his clients. When he learned that Ponzi was planning to head back to the United States, he introduced him to 5 young Italian men who were also interested in crossing the border. Now, it perhaps goes without saying that crossing international borders in 1910 bears almost nothing in common with what we experience now. Ponzi was an Italian national with a Canadian criminal record, and he anticipated no problems heading into the USA. I mean, I think that says it all. But these 5 other Italians were the era's equivalent of undocumented people. The border may have been a lot easier to cross back then, but these were the kind of guys who would get stopped. Ponzi agreed to act as their guide and English interpreter to help shepherd them across the border. Now, he was later accused of acting as a coyote, accepting money to essentially smuggle people into the United States. Ponzi himself presented the whole thing as a big misunderstanding. In his autobiography, he would claim that a friend had innocently asked him to look out for a few fellow Italians who couldn't speak English and who just happened to be on the same train. If the plan had been to smuggle these men into America, then it was a patently terrible plan. Sure enough, at the border, a customs inspector immediately became suspicious of Ponzi and his companions. Despite Ponzi's assertions that he didn't even know these guys, all 6 of the men were arrested. After an uncomfortable 2-month stay in a jail in Plattsburgh, New York, Ponzi met with a prosecutor who convinced him that if he pled guilty, he would likely be looking at a $50 fine, or at worst a month in prison. But in this case, Ponzi really did catch a bad break. All 5 of the Italian men who had been with him on the train testified against Ponzi at trial, making Ponzi out to be the worst kind of human trafficker. In exchange for their testimony, all of these men were released without charge. Ponzi, on the other hand, had the book thrown at him. He was fined $500 and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But because this was a federal crime, Ponzi got to serve that sentence in the noticeably more comfortable federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. But despite the more comfortable digs, it didn't change the fact that in the 7 years since Ponzi had left Italy, he had decidedly not made a fortune. He had been implicated in a bank fraud, he had been caught forging checks, and he had been convicted of smuggling human beings across an international border. He had done hard time in penitentiaries in both Canada and the United States. After serving 2 years in Atlanta, plus an extra month for his inability to pay his $500 fine, Ponzi was finally released. He was now 30 years old, and once again, Charles Ponzi was starting from scratch. So, let's pause here, and when we come back, we'll see how this 2-time jailbird managed to thoroughly reinvent himself. Today's episode of Our Fake History is being brought to you by Homes.com. If you've ever been in the market for a new home, you know home shopping can be a lot. There's so much you don't know and so much you need to know. What are the neighborhoods like? What are the schools like? Who's the agent who knows the listing or neighborhood best? And why can't all this information just be in one place? Well, now it is on Homes.com. They've got everything you need to know about the listing itself, but even better, they've got comprehensive neighborhood guides and detailed reports about local schools. And their agent directory helps you see the agent's current listings and sales history. Homes.com collaboration tools make it easier than ever to share all this information with your family. It's a whole cul-de-sac of home shopping information all at your fingertips. Homes.com. We've done your homework. Hey friends, I don't know if you folks are into the whole New Year's resolution thing, but pretty much every year after the holiday, I make a pledge to become more healthy. And some years I am more successful at this than others. Well, this year I'm hoping AG1 can help. Sustainable health is about consistency, not perfection. Simplify your nutrition with AG1, multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants in one scoop. AG1 is the opposite of complexity. 20 seconds, 1 scoop, 8 ounces of water, done. Drink it first thing, before coffee, before checking your phone. It will become a habit that anchors everything else. I've given AG1 a try, and you know what? I like it. AG1 has over 50,000 verified 5-star reviews and comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. Go to drinkag1.com/fake to get their best offer. For a limited time only, get a free AG1 duffel bag and a free AG1 welcome kit with your first subscription order. Only while supplies last. That's drinkag1.com/fake. drinkag1.com/fake. After being released from federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Charles Ponzi made an honest effort to go straight and live as a law-abiding citizen. He headed to Alabama coal country, where he soon found work in a coal mining camp mostly populated with recently arrived Italian laborers. He worked mostly as a translator, but also provided some bookkeeping services and was occasionally drafted into nursing duties by the infirmary. While he was working there, one of his fellow nurses, a young woman named Pearl, was terribly burnt when one of the cooking stoves suddenly exploded while she was making meals for her patients. The burns were so severe, in fact, that unless she was able to get a skin graft quickly, the doctors feared that she would die from her wounds. The only problem was that no one in the mining camp was willing to go under the knife and donate their skin. Except our guy, Charlie Ponzi. When no one else came forward, Ponzi, who only had a passing acquaintance with Pearl, stepped up. Over the course of 2 fairly intense operations, Ponzi ended up donating 122 square inches of skin from his back and thighs. The skin graft was ultimately successful, and Pearl's life was saved. Now, I bring this up because it's yet more evidence of Ponzi's authentic generosity. At that point in his life, he had nothing to gain by agreeing to undergo this painful operation. It was a truly altruistic act. Now, later in life, he had a way of bringing up the skin donation as evidence of his good character, but I don't think that changes the fact that he saved a woman's life and bore the scars of the procedure for the rest of his days. After growing restless and seeing no real future in the mining camps, Ponzi bounced from Mobile, Alabama, to New Orleans, to Florida, and then eventually to New York City. By this time, the Great War had broken out in Europe. Ponzi learned that the Italian government had put out a call for Italians living abroad to return home and join the army reserves. He went so far as boarding a steamer heading from New York to Rome to do exactly that. But before the ship was out of New York Harbor, he learned from another Italian passenger that the Italian government wasn't compensating reservists for their travel expenses. So, he apparently left the ship so fast that some of his luggage went on to Italy without him. According to biographer Mitchell Zukoff, there are even some accounts that Ponzi jumped overboard and swam to the pier while the steamer was pulling out of New York. But honestly, that one seems a little hard to believe. Ponzi would not stay long in the Big Apple. After seeing a classified ad for a job as a clerk for an importer-exporter in Boston, Ponzi relocated to the city where he had first arrived in the United States. And luckily, he got the job. It would be in Boston where Ponzi would ultimately make his name, for better or worse. Not long after settling in as a resident of Boston, Ponzi was introduced to Rose Necco. Rose's father had also been an immigrant from Italy who had found modest success as a Boston fruit merchant. By all accounts, Rose was a vivacious and spirited young woman with movie star good looks. More than one person commented that she bore a resemblance to the silent film actress Lillian Gish. Ponzi would later claim that when he first saw her, it was love at first sight. After meeting her, Ponzi pursued Rose with the same dogged determination that he pursued everything. After a long courtship that featured nearly daily gifts of flowers or sodas, Rose agreed to marry him. But notably, Ponzi never told his fiancée about his time spent in prison. But she found out from Ponzi's mother, Imelda. When Imelda Ponzi learned of the engagement, she wrote Rose a letter from Italy. In her letter, she said that she should only marry Charlie if she could accept that he was an ex-convict. Now, In a way, it was good that Imelda broke the news to Rose, because she passed along the version of events that had been presented to her by her son. In that version of things, Charles had never done anything wrong and had been unfairly imprisoned after naively helping some friends. After reading the letter, Rose decided that she still wanted to marry Ponzi. Now, interestingly, Charles never knew what his mother wrote to Rose, so he assumed for years that Rose did not know that he had served time. She did, and she accepted him. Rose would be remarkably committed to her husband, even as his famous scheme eventually unraveled. For his part, Ponzi also remained hopelessly devoted to Rose. A few months after marrying Rose, Ponzi was convinced to quit his clerk's job to help revive his father-in-law's struggling fruit business. But Necco Brothers Fruit Company was beyond saving. Within a few months, the company was bankrupt, and Ponzi was once again looking for work. This time, however, Ponzi was determined to go into business for himself. Thanks to his clerk's job, he had become familiar with the world of importing and exporting. But he found it difficult to get started, given that he had no real contacts in that world. So he came up with a plan to start distributing a free trade gazette for importer-exporters. It would be produced in 5 different languages and would contain useful addresses, custom details, and editorials relevant to the world of international trade. The idea was that this paper would also feature ample advertising space for aspiring importer-exporters like himself. By selling ads, he believed that the newly dubbed Trader's Guide would quickly become very profitable. After his first mass mailing to importers around the world, requests for ads would surely come pouring in. They did not. The Trader's Guide was expensive to produce and never came close to generating enough ad revenue to cover the cost of its production. After slugging it out as an entrepreneur for less than a year, it looked like Ponzi was going to oversee yet another failed business. But the death throes of the Trader's Guide inadvertently gave Ponzi the germ of an idea that would change his life. In August of 1919, Ponzi received a letter from a Spanish businessman requesting to be sent a copy of the Trader's Guide. To cover the postage costs for sending the guide to Spain, the Spanish fellow had included something known as an international reply coupon. Now, what is an international reply coupon? Well, you could be forgiven for not knowing. This bit of postal technology was obscure even in 1919 and is doubly so today. Ponzi had never heard of international reply coupons, or IRCs, before he had been sent one on that fateful day. Now, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to take a few moments here to really break down how international reply coupons functioned. And I'm not doing this just because I love the minutia of the Postal Service. Believe it or not, these IRCs were a key component of Ponzi's scheme. We need to understand them to understand the whole house of cards. So bear with me here. International reply coupons were originally developed in 1906 by the Universal Postal Union, which was one of the world's first international governmental organizations. The idea was that the international reply coupons were going to make it easier to send mail across national borders. In the world of business, if you wanted a client or associate to mail you a document or anything else, proper practice was to make the request by mail and then include a self-addressed stamped envelope. That way, the person sending the document did not need to eat the postage fees. But this was really hard to do if you were sending something between countries. Take Ponzi's Spanish client, for instance. If something was going to be mailed from the United States to Spain, it would need to have American postage on it. Back then, this Spanish fellow had no way of buying American stamps in his home country. He could have potentially included cash for the return postage in his original letter, but then there was the hassle of having to exchange a foreign currency. So, to simplify things, the Universal Postal Union started offering coupons that could be purchased at a post office in one country and then redeemed for the right stamps in a post office in another country. These coupons could act as legal tender specifically to purchase foreign stamps. So, if you wanted something mailed to you from America to Spain, you would enclose an international reply coupon for the correct postage. Your person on the other end would then go to the post office, exchange the coupon for stamps, and then send you your requested package. Easy peasy. When this was first set up in 1906, the Universal Postal Union also created a series of regulations that set the rate of exchange between all the member countries' currencies and the postal coupons. A postal coupon bought for $1 American needed to be able to buy the equivalent of $1 of Spanish postage. In 1906, the system worked well and was virtually impossible to abuse. But in the intervening 13 years, the world had been through a lot. The massive disruption of the Great War had turned everything upside down. In the aftermath of the war, many European currencies had been significantly devalued, and by 1919, the Universal Postal Union still had not caught up with this fact. The exchange rates for the coupons were still set at 1906 levels and had not yet been changed to reflect the new values of many currencies. This was the opportunity spied by our man, Charlie Ponzi. Back in 1906, an international reply coupon had cost a Spanish customer 30 centavos. In 1919, it still cost 30 centavos, despite the fact that the Spanish currency, known as the peseta, had been devalued considerably. Ponzi noticed that since the Universal Postal Union had been dragging their feet on adjusting their exchange rates, this Spanish gentleman had managed to buy 5 cents worth of American postage for around 4.5 cents. The IRC had inadvertently given him a discount. Ponzi then calculated that 1 American dollar could buy a total of 20 international reply coupons in the United States. But in Spain, thanks to the favorable exchange rate, 1 American dollar could now buy 22 international reply coupons. If those 22 coupons were then sent to the United States, $1 would have been turned into $1.10, a tidy 10% return. Now, to be clear, the person running this scheme would ultimately receive $1.10 in stamps. But transforming the stamps back into cash was a concern for another day. What really got Ponzi excited was what he had recently learned about the currency back in his home country of Italy. After the Great War, few European currencies had been as severely devalued as the Italian lira. He soon discovered that 1 American dollar in 1919 could buy 66 international reply coupons in Italy. If those coupons were then redeemed in the United States, you could effectively buy $3.30 worth of stamps after having only spent 1 American dollar. That was a 230% return. If this could be done at scale, a clever person could make a killing. Or at least, so thought Ponzi. Now, I know this is twisty, and if you're anything like me, anytime math is involved, even simple math, I immediately lose my ability to follow along. So allow me to lay out the whole scheme as Ponzi envisaged it. First, Ponzi would send American cash to some of his friends or family members back in Italy. Those friends would then go to an Italian post office where they would buy as many international reply coupons as they could. They would then send the coupons to Ponzi back in Boston. Ponzi would then take the coupons to an American post office where he would redeem them for stamps. He would now have 230% more stamps than he would have if he had bought them normally in the United States. Then, well, after that point, the plan got a little hazy for Charlie Ponzi. He could maybe become a stamp salesman. He could potentially sell the stamps at a discount and still turn a nice profit. Perhaps he could find some large company that did lots of business by mail and needed to buy stamps in bulk. In theory, the whole thing could work. But there were all sorts of potentially troubling questions. Could international reply coupons be purchased in large enough quantities to make the scheme profitable at scale? How many of these coupons would an American post office redeem at one time? Could you really sell all those stamps once you had them? What if the Universal Postal Union got wise and finally updated their exchange rates? The biggest question of all, was any of this legal? The answer to that final, most important question was just murky enough that Ponzi would become a very rich man before anyone in the United States could answer it definitively. For his part, Ponzi insisted to his dying day that the international reply coupon scheme was not only legal, but was in fact a stroke of genius. When describing his moment of inspiration in his autobiography, he became downright poetic, writing, quote, "The quote-unquote racket of international coupons actually fell in my lap like a ripe apple. I did not have to shake the tree to get it. I just reached over where it had fallen and took it. It looked good, luscious. I examined it for flaws, found none. I had to bite. I wouldn't have been human if I didn't." End quote. Easy there, Ponzi. Remember, you're trying to convince us that you're not a total crook. In his book, Ponzi would also claim that the reason that he was ultimately foiled was because his idea was so good that jealous bankers and Wall Street speculators plotted to bring him down. He writes, quote, "And it may seem strange, almost amazing, that my path might have been overlooked until then by the financial wizards of Wall Street. But it so happened, and those birds have never forgiven me since, for having caught them napping. When you steal a march on them, you can bet your bottom dollar they are going to be on your trail until your beneficiary collects on your insurance policy." End quote. The idea that jealous Wall Street gurus ultimately destroyed Ponzi is more classic Ponzi humbug. The truth is that while his international reply coupon scheme may have worked in theory, he never truly put the plan into action. Aside from an initial test of the scheme involving a handful of coupons, Ponzi never got around to buying international reply coupons in bulk in Italy. As far as we know, he never once sold a single stamp. The IRC scheme very quickly became a front. Because the plan worked in theory, it offered a convenient explanation for how Ponzi was able to make astounding returns for his investors. The mechanics of the scheme were also convoluted enough that it served to confuse many of his skeptics. To borrow a term from the world of screenwriting, the international reply coupons were a MacGuffin. That is, an object or desired thing that is often introduced in the first act of a film that helps drive the plot. But MacGuffins are ultimately not the point of the story, and often by the final act, they are all but forgotten. Legendary director Alfred Hitchcock once explained that, quote, "The MacGuffin is the thing that the spies are after, but the audience doesn't care," end quote. In our analogy here, the audience would be Ponzi's eager investors. Many of them did not care how Ponzi made them their money. They just knew that he could do it. The international reply coupons were a MacGuffin that could be chased by the skeptics. This was a scheme inside of a scheme, and Ponzi was just getting started. Okay, that's all for this week. Join us again in 2 weeks' time when we will continue our look at the Ponzi scheme. Before we go this week, as always, I need to give some very special shout-outs to the folks in my Patreon community. Big ups to Luke Cullen, to James, to Connor, to The Dark Canuck, to Shauna R., to Maytober, to Thomas, to Samuel Pomerlow, to Chris Boswinkle, to Christine Kozel, to Timothy Ayerman, to Raphael Immerman, to Dave White, to Chernabog 42, to Maddie B, to Michael Vasic, to Denny Joe Fast, to Sandra Fish, and to Baroness Gunora. All of these folks have decided to pledge at $5 or more every month on Patreon, so you know what that means. They are beautiful human beings. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support of this show. It means everything. I am now hard at work researching the next patrons-only episode, which will be on the 7 Wonders of the Ancient World. If you want to get access to that extra episode, to all the past extra episodes, and to an ad-free feed of this podcast, then consider becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/OurFakeHistory. Find a level of support that works for you. Honestly, if you like this show and you want it to keep coming, the best way to support us is through Patreon. I will also throw one more reminder about our trip to Greece. If you want a book, head to OurFakeHistory.com and follow the links for the trip, or just click on the link that will be in the show notes. If you ever want to get in touch with me, do not hesitate. I love hearing from you. I'm also going to be answering questions about this Ponzi scheme series in an upcoming bonus episode. So if you've got questions or you just want to say hi, send me an email at ourfakehistory@gmail.com. Patrons can also drop their questions in the patrons-only chat associated with this series. But you can also find me on all the social media. I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/OurFakeHistory. I'm on Blue Sky at OurFakeHistory. I'm on Instagram at OurFakeHistory. I'm making little videos on TikTok if you are interested in those. I am also on YouTube. Just head to YouTube and search for the Our Fake History YouTube channel. As always, the theme music for our show comes to us from Dirty Church. Check out more from Dirty Church at dirtychurch.bandcamp.com. All the other music you heard on the show today was written and recorded by me. My name is Sebastian Major, and remember, just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it isn't real.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset. Free. This is the mantra. Free. This is the mindset.
With movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates.
This is awesome.
And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.